Hello. Sorry, I'm just getting everything on the right screens. So as Chris said, my name is Sonya. I am a technology enthusiast. I'm a freelance Word person, and I use a lot of websites and apps and software products. I am by no means an expert on anything that I'm going to talk about, so I would like you to regard this as more of a sort of experimental way of viewing the world and viewing building software, web apps, etc. So this talk is aimed at all of you people who actually make websites, apps, and software products, and about how you can nudge your own users toward better security habits. So forewarning, I'm going to use passwords as an example a lot, because they're the most common security credential that regular users actually manage and control. But this way of thinking about things, this security-focused behavior design idea, is not limited to passwords, but I hope you'll be able to sort of flex your imaginations a little bit. So let's dive in. You may already know this, but typical users have really bad security habits. It's not because they're stupid or lazy, but really because they have different priorities. Most people aren't judged at work or in their personal lives by their security habits, by their password hygiene or anything like that. And someone who hasn't personally experienced an account takeover or a similar event is not on high alert. So if you're a quote-unquote normal person, sometimes we call them non-technical people or people who aren't paranoid hackers. If you're that kind of person, security habits that are very robust don't necessarily feel like they're worth the hassle. So, just in case you don't believe me, I want to show you some stats. Splash Data is a password manager company, and they conduct an annual analysis of commonly used passwords. For the past 5 years straight, the most common passwords have been the number string 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and the word password. So I find it disturbing that any app is allowing people to choose these values as a password. And in the same vein, RoboForm, it's another password manager company, commissioned a survey of 1,000 people in the US and the UK about their password practices. So 1,000 people is a fairly small sample, but it's big enough to give us a sense of the trends. Only 8% of the respondents said that they used a password manager, and you can compare that to 25% of people, 23%, sorry, who said that they always use the exact same password. And in preparing this talk, I actually also contacted the makers of the two most well-known password managers, which are 1Password and LastPass. And the 1Password team told me that they have millions of users. They couldn't specify further than that. But LastPass's spokesperson told me that they have 8 million users. So we can guesstimate generously that about 20 million people use password managers, kind of adding those two together, doubling it, and then adding a little bit more. And if that's the ballpark figure, then that is about 6% of America's 2014 population. And the world of people who use the internet or who use software is way bigger than just America. So there's a lot of room for improvement here. Especially since, as I said, passwords are only the most obvious security credential. So there are lots of other habits that people could be improving. And I mentioned account takeovers before. That's one of the most visible problems that is caused by people's poor security habits. So if you've ever worked support or talked to the support team, you've probably had to deal with these or you've heard about them. So some of the mistakes that lead to these issues are not limited to the normal people who I mentioned in the beginning. You might recognize this guy. Mark Zuckerberg is pretty widely acknowledged to be a genius. Even if you don't like Facebook as a product, you can probably admit that he's a great CEO. Facebook is an extremely valuable company. He's a smart person, he's high profile, he's presumably more tech savvy than the average user. And he is the type of person who a bad actor might target specifically. So he should have some protections in place, right? Well, recent headlines showed us that Mark Zuckerberg used the password da, on at least 3 different social media profiles, so LinkedIn, Twitter, and Pinterest. We know this because LinkedIn had a breach. It was a password database from a few years ago that was recently, we became aware that this had happened. And Zuckerberg's other 2 accounts, the Twitter and Pinterest accounts, were hacked. So that's pretty embarrassing for him. And imagine how frustrating it is for Twitter and Pinterest, because they didn't do anything wrong, and here they are having to deal with a high-profile account takeover. Every other company that had to deal with account takeovers because of the LinkedIn breach is in a similar situation. And LinkedIn is, far from the only company that has had this problem. All of this is because users reuse passwords just all the time. And this specific incident showed that lots of people use their LinkedIn credentials on multiple platforms, and it's just caused problems for everybody. So someone who reused their password might require support from Twitter, from Pinterest, or more importantly, from a bank, from PayPal, all these various companies that deal with some really sensitive information. And from the company point of view, support teams are really expensive. They don't scale in the same way that technology does because you just need more and more people. And every time a customer has to interact with your support system, it's a tax on their goodwill. They get frustrated. And it doesn't really matter whether it was something that you were responsible for in the first place. If you can't fix their problem easily, they will get frustrated at you regardless. So to be fair, Mark Zuckerberg's situation and similar situations might not have been a problem in the first place if LinkedIn had done a better job protecting their passwords. But let me give you an example that is pure user error. So Verizon did a study in 2015 which showed that 23% of people who receive phishing emails open them, and 11% actually open attachments. So that's a lot of people who are just blindly opening things. Or here's another example, which I'm a little embarrassed to admit actually, which is whenever I turn on 2-factor authentication, which I try to do as often as I can, the website will tell me, here are your backup codes if you ever, something happens to your phone. And what I do is just take a screenshot of the backup codes or take a photo with my phone, which kind of, defeats the purpose of the backup codes and also isn't particularly secure. And yet I do it because it's the path of least resistance, and there's no shaming mechanism in place from the website that's telling me, hey, I know what you're about to do and you shouldn't do it. So this is a quote from a guide called The Basics of Web Application Security by Cade Cairns and Daniel Summerfield. It's published by Martin Fowler. You can find it on the web. It's a great guide. It's mostly oriented towards technology, so sort of the nitty-gritty of security design. But I really like what they said, which is the first time someone signs up for your site of captioned cat pictures using the same email address and password that they use for their bank login, your seemingly low-risk credentials database has become a vehicle for storing financial credentials. So how do you deal with this general problem of users not understanding how to take their security seriously or just not caring enough to try? So I will admit, technical work is the first, best, most effective way for you to do something about this. Just to throw out some basics, use HTTPS everywhere. Let's Encrypt gave a presentation yesterday evening. They're a great resource if you want to do this at low cost. If you're storing passwords, hash them, salt them. Use well-understood crypto. Don't roll your own solution. Find cross-site scripting opportunities on your website and eliminate them. Enable multiple account management so that people who are using your software for any kind of business case can switch between people. And that limits the need for them to share passwords and do that kind of insecure thing. So that said, technical security design is not what I'm here to talk about, and I don't know that much about it anyway. So let's assume that you've set up your system safely from an infrastructure point of view. So next, you need to think about the thing that I want to talk about, which is behavior design. This is a term that's fairly intuitive. It basically means what it sounds like, but I'll explain the jargon. It has a lot in common with user experience design. So instead of focusing on how the user feels, behavior design is about guiding users towards specific actions. And really, it's a nicer way to talk about manipulation, if I'm going to be honest with you. So anyone who has shipped a product, whether it's an open source, whether it's proprietary, whether it's a service or something that people download, anyone who shipped something and then had to deal with users' reactions will probably know how frustratingly impossible it can be to get users to do what you want them to do or what they're quote-unquote supposed to do. It takes a careful balance of limiting the options that are available, making sure the right options are available, and incentivizing the desired behavior. So behavior design might involve instructions, or it might involve the GUI. It depends on the actions that you're trying to encourage and the technology that you are building specifically. So really, this is more of a mindset than its own separate discipline, like I said at the beginning. And for the most part, there aren't well-defined best practices outside of certain kinds of marketing. So I do want to acknowledge that behavior design is often paired with technical work. It's not something that happens in isolation. It's usually a multi-team effort. For example, have you ever set up an account and faced a list of password rules? I'm not even going to ask you to raise your hands because I know that all of you have. So it'll be something like, must contain a capital letter, a number, an asterisk, 3 money signs, your grandma's maiden name, etc. And in this system, there's the written explanation, which is integrated into the website design. Then there's the box that you type in. And then there's the indicator saying whether or not what you typed was okay. And it would be silly for all of that to be set up if the underlying back end still let you choose a password without 3 money signs in it or whatever the requirements are. So all of the user-facing stuff needs to talk to the code behind the scenes in order to be meaningful. That's why this is a multi-team, multi-layer effort. Like I said before, a group of people who are really good at behavior design is sleazy marketers. At least they do it the most obviously. So I'm not saying that all marketing is sleazy. Marketing is really important and useful, but certain techniques are pretty obnoxious. So you know those pop-ups that make you feel bad about closing them, like this one? So this pop-up from greatest.com, and I'm not trying to call them out specifically, 8 million and 3 websites use this technique. But this pop-up makes you say that you don't want to be your healthiest self in order to close it. And there is a little bit of cognitive dissonance, even if it's just a moment when you're faced with this, and it makes you more likely to say, yes, I want to give you my email, blah, blah, blah. And so this is an example of behavior design, and which comes from the excellent confirmshaming.tumblr.com. So another weird behavior design thing is Amazon making you claim that you're not yourself if you want to log out. So if I want to log out of Amazon, which I don't actually do pretty much ever, but if I did, I would have to say that I was not Sonya, which is weird. I am Sonya. So there's this moment of feeling strange about doing the thing that they don't want me to do, and hence less people do it less times. So I have another example which doesn't come with a screenshot, so you're just going to have to use your imagination. And this is an example that I approve of. When you sign up for a Stripe account, Stripe is a payments processor, which I assume most of you know, just in case. They encourage you to turn on 2-factor authentication. And then every other time that you visit the Stripe dashboard, there's a yellow banner that's asking you to enable 2FA, and it's still there on top of everything else, pressuring you to secure your account. So it's a visual distraction, and Stripe is forcing you to think about 2FA every time you're on their website. So this is a behavior design technique that I like to call irritating the user until they do what you want. It's not effective on everyone, but it works often enough to be worth the effort. I'm sure Stripe has seen increased usage of 2-factor authentication because of that bar that's hovering over everything. Let's look at what not to do. So ThoughtWorks developer Sam Nguyen blogged about a security flaw in a plugin for Visual Studio Code. And Visual Studio Code, in case you don't know, is an open source code editor. He gave me permission to use his screenshots and to use this example. So Sam was trying out Visual Studio Code, and he realized that it didn't have a built-in spell checker, which is a feature that he wanted. So he decided to look for an extension through their sort of quasi-marketplace search platform. I have mixed feelings about this design. On the one hand, I like that the README and license buttons are more prominent than the download from the cloud right now button, which is the one on the far right. But you can download without doing any due diligence. I actually checked this. I downloaded like 20 megabytes in order to just check this one thing. The extension, once you click that cloud button, just downloads automatically, which makes this a big problem. So when Sam looked at the README for this extension, he found this disclaimer, which is that document text is sent to the service over unencrypted HTTP. Do not use this extension with sensitive or private documents. As Sam Newman points out in his blog post, anyone editing private code should not be using a spell checker that sends data via HTTP. That's totally insecure. And if you're working for a company like GitHub, just to use our host as an example, who has a lot of users, the business has a lot of sensitive data which affects all of those users. So exposing code that may be used in production can cause all kinds of problems, so you don't want to do that. Of course, the pushback on this concern is that people should be responsible for vetting everything that they install. And Visual Studio Code shouldn't have to worry about naive users. And there is a legitimate argument to be made there that everyone is responsible for everything that they put on their own computer. On the other hand, people are just not going to do that. It's not going to happen because they're not thinking about it. Or, maybe they are lazy, maybe they're just distracted. Or, some people might think, because of the way this interface is designed, that the extensions are vetted by Visual Studio Code. They would be wrong, but they might think that anyway. And many users just won't consider the issue consciously at all. So, hypothetically, the interface could pop up a disclaimer after you click on that cloud button instead of downloading instantly. It could say something like, "Are you sure you want to download now? Remember, extensions have access to your data. If you're handling sensitive information, it's a good idea to look at the README and license first." And then you can let people click through that if they don't care, but it's a reminder, hey, this is something you can do to be safer. And in fact, a lot of behavior design is really just telling people stuff, conveying information with words. And in other domains, this is usually called copywriting, which is an art that is sometimes neglected when it comes to product design. Copywriting usually lives with marketing. And I personally think that it's misguided to silo these two domains. So when you're including copywriting in the user interface, and when you're including it in the planning phase of the user interface, it's like leaving comments in your code to explain what it does, except it's aimed at explaining to the user instead of, say, other developers. Like I said, marketing is full of behavior design, and it's not all shady stuff like the pop-ups that make you say, no, I don't want to keep my firstborn child. Maybe you've heard the phrase, benefits, not features. This is my favorite slide, so get ready for it. It has pink on it, so, The idea behind benefits over features is that instead of pitching people on the mechanism of your product, you should explain how it will improve their life. So, for example, Google's tagline wouldn't be enter text into a search bar and get results. It would maybe be something like all the internet's information at your fingertips. Even that maybe doesn't quite get to the core. So maybe it should be, know the answers before your friends. Something that appeals to people's unsatisfied needs and leverages human nature. So as much as you can do the sort of social tie-ins that tie in with how people navigate status in their normal lives, the better. So this also plays into security-focused behavior design. You can explain security benefits instead of security features. So instead of saying, like, the password requirement is XYZ, you can say, longer passwords protect your sensitive information, so we require at least 12 characters. You should require at least 12 characters and hopefully give people the opportunity to use much longer passwords if they want to. But, that's still pretty lackluster because it's generic. So maybe you're working with customer relationship management software. I believe Sugar CRM is an open source CRM. So your pitch to get users to do something like turn on two-factor authentication is not just protect your account, but it's something like keep your data, your customer data, out of everybody else's hands. That makes it more compelling to them to go through the hassle. So behavior design doesn't always have to be situated on the user interface. You have lots of opportunities to communicate with your users. You can do things like send lifecycle emails that educate them and point them to next steps. You can maintain a robust help center and prompt users to check it out when it looks like they're having issues. You can make tutorials about security best practices and explain why they're worth the effort. And all of those sort of external resources can be linked from in the UI. So here's an example of behavior design beyond the UI. Pandora sent this email to my dad in response to the LinkedIn breach that I mentioned earlier, explaining that his username was found in the leaked data and asking him to change his password. As I mentioned in the beginning, I was going to talk a lot about passwords, and now that I'm almost done, passwords are actually a great example of the trade-offs that come with security. Usually, good security habits are inconvenient. That's why they work. They provide friction to accessing something. But if you're a startup that's trying to grow 300% every week, adding friction to the sign-up process is the last thing you want. You don't want to say in the sign-up process, like, hey, you should use a password manager, because it's going to be an extra thing for people to think about, and you don't necessarily want to interrupt their thought process while they're signing up for your service, your product, whatever. This is less of a problem for open source projects, but even software that isn't necessarily looking to earn money thrives on user adoption, and you may not want to set up all these barriers to using what you're making. So I do think that it's a legitimate business decision to streamline onboarding or any other important application process at the expense of encouraging users to be safer. And of course, the opposite business case for putting work into security-focused behavior design is that it will reduce your PR problems down the road. And I mean PR, public relations, not pull request. However, that trade-off might not be attractive. You might not want to do it. So I would encourage you to, if you decide to incorporate any of these principles, A/B test everything that you can and see how your actual users respond to it. I assume that you know your business and your product better than I can. But, if you can spare the time and resources, please do incorporate more security-focused behavior design into your product or your service or whatever you're making. I encourage you to at least try it. Users probably won't thank you directly. The quote-unquote normal people aren't thinking about this. But I'm happy to thank you. I will thank you. Let me know that you did it, and I will give you all the thanks. And you can feel good about helping people take care of themselves when they wouldn't necessarily do it on their own. So that's it. I'm Sonya. My website is sonyaellenmann.com. My Twitter handle is @sonyaellenmann. I put a copy of this talk on my website. The URL was at the beginning. I don't know if you guys saw that or not. So if you want to go into more depth, feel free to do that. And also feel free to contact me if you want to talk about this stuff, because I love talking about it. All right, thank you.